I've seen the movie twice now,
Sure.
and it hits emotionally on both viewings, especially the beach scene in particular, where you have this incredible line of dialogue delivered so beautifully by Sopa Dirasu, where this line comes up and it's the memories that pain you when someone leaves you are the same ones that'll comfort you later. Can I ask you who wrote that line and what does that mean to you?
Much of our experience making this film has been governed by that sort of absence of people we love and who we've lost. No more so than my brother, who's the lead writer of the film, and he so graciously wrote that incredible line in the film. I think it means something different to him than it means to me, because I think, as we learned in this process, we have very differing views of grief and our relationship with grief and our father. I can't speak for him, but I can speak for myself. And what it really means to me is that it's if I like, I can use my mother as an example. It's the times I get frustrated with my mother, and I don't want to talk to my mother, and maybe she's being very stubborn on something, and it's really hard to get through, and I don't want to continue that conversation, so I stop that conversation. I think the moments I sort of like look back and I'm like, actually, just let her have it, because ultimately, in years to come, she might not be around. So I'm going to treasure those stubborn moments even more. And I think it's just holding space and holding grace for people. I really think that's what it means. I think especially if you have the privilege of seeing someone grow old, everyone gets this sort of, like scared of getting old, but I think people grow old because it's actually for our benefit, so that we can say goodbye in a capacity that's a lot softer than something that feels a lot more tragic.
You mentioned those stubborn conversations. Were those conversations you had with your mom in terms of doing any personal research or background on your father that you needed to know, or even your brother Wally needed to know in terms of writing the script?
Not per se for the film. I think losing our father when we were infants, when I was an infant, has always made me curious about him. We've always had those conversations with her about what he was like and how they met, and what does she remember about him, and do we have similar characteristics and personal traits and stuff like that. I think my mum's just stubborn for the reality of it. She's an Aries woman. My father's a Taurus man. I'm a Taurus man. So I think we're both inherently quite stubborn people. But no, I think my mum has always been really generous with the legacy of our father. She's always, for having lost someone almost 39 years ago, 40 years ago, pretty much. I think she's just constantly been, like you said, like a vessel of information and history and knowledge that we could always draw on. So much so that years before this film was even conceived, I started recording our conversations, because I wanted my sort of hypothetical children to know what she sounded like and how she told stories and what her laugh was like when she was a bit younger, and just keep on documenting her.
When did you start learning about this particular time period when you were in your teenage years? Because you also went to boarding school, to a British boarding school. And can
Mm.
you tell me a little bit about MKO Abiola, and who he means and what he means to you?
I think what we remember about Abiola is that he was everywhere. He was a philanthropist. He loved sport. He gave money to schools. He had a newspaper, I think. I think he was also a Muslim man was from the southwest, and he married women from different parts of the country, which endeared him tribally to loads of different areas. As you can imagine, Nigeria is a quagmire of different ethnicities and languages and people, and everybody's trying to advocate for their people and their communities. So having an astute businessman who's married into your community means that you feel more invested in how that person is going to lead. And I think so many people had bought into Abiola's story and who he was and how he'd run his successful businesses and how he was very pro Nigeria and sort of less about the sort of international community and the geopolitics of the world. I think he represented this idea of hope, this idea of the country going somewhere great and having a lot more autonomy and more of its own self-reliance and self-determination. And I think people bought into that in a way that they haven't sort of fit within the military dictatorship, because the military dictatorship, they don't promise you anything. They don't offer you anything other than brutality and a firm hand, you know. And the way they took over the nationalization of the country's raw materials and resources was obviously in an exploitative fashion. So we wanted something better for ourselves. And I think Abiola, to my mother's generation, represented hope. He represented this idea of moving towards something, the promise of delivering on something, the promise of what this country was always, quote unquote, destined to be, and the potential they always saw. And I think that period, that election was like the sort of genesis of what the hope could be. But no, quickly the hope started to sort of ignite, was extinguished when the military put it out, and we were even like lured into something even more oppressive, even more an attack on human rights and human civilities and the press and activists in an even worse military dictator after that. So I think 1993 was a real period. And like I said before, history also wasn't taught. So I think for the younger generation, they know so little about who Abiola was and what 1993 is.
Do you feel a greater responsibility then, because this might be, somebody's first time experiencing or knowing or understanding this part of history, specifically in Nigeria?
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to using archive and referencing real people, you're always going to have a greater responsibility because there are families involved, there are people involved. And, we didn't use as much of Abiola in it because we weren't trying to eulogize him. We weren't trying to say he was this perfect person. We were just using him for the context and the contextual period of the time. But I think more responsibility lay within us for our family in terms of like the stories we were mining to put into Fola's stories, into his experiences, into his memories. So much of that is from actually my father's experience. My father's brother actually did drown, and that's who my brother Wale is named after. I think he had a complicated relationship with his dad. Only difference is the family in the film are working class and we're more middle class. But I think when you're telling stories, especially as an opportunity, knowing fully well how this film is constructed, that it's probably going to get, had a European premiere and it's going to go around the world. We have a duty of care to Nigerians first and foremost to be ambassadors of what the reality of Nigeria is, as opposed to some sort of fancified, glossy, like sort of clinical, anesthetized version of what we want people to think the country is. It's like, no, we want Nigerians to see their country, to see their experience on screen first and foremost. And everyone's welcome to participate. But I think if we can serve the community responsibly and be accountable to the serving of that first, then everybody's welcome to come and drink from that. Because I think if Nigerians didn't feel that the film represented them, I think the film would have a lot less sort of like love and attention and feeling than it carries at the moment.
Have you gotten any feedback from the Nigerian community on the film as yet? Because I know it's only just starting to get released in the coming weeks, theatrically and then available later on Mubi. But obviously that I think would probably be a really important, feedback. And you've mentioned before that criticism is something that you really value as well.
100%. Yeah, the only place the film has had a theatrical release is Nigeria. It had a theatrical release last September, and which was extended into October, which is 1st of October is our Independence Day. So we were in the theaters then. I think for Nigeria, it's been very illuminating. These sorts of films aren't necessarily, the subject matter in this sort of film isn't necessarily what is common in Nollywood. I think we're more in lieu of humor and escapism than actual reality. And I think what this film does is kind of it grounds the reality of the older generation. I think for the younger generation, it teaches them a part of history. And I think it communally brings people together through like a means of communal grieving, our means of communally talking about masculinity, our means of communally understanding what our elders and parents and caregivers went through politically. And I just think our means is like a portrayal to the chaos and the silence of Nigeria, and also not feeding into the stereotype. I think so many Nigerians have seen this film and felt seen, And I think beyond Nigeria, Africans have seen this film, like Moroccans, Senegalese, Cameroonians, anyone from the diaspora, even Latin America has seen this film. And in South Korea, they've seen this film and felt seen, because I think there's a commonality in our experiences. There's so much, caregivers are having to sacrifice, and what masculinity has to like itself in and emasculate itself in. And I think Nigeria was the first litmus test. I think once Nigerians gave us their blessing and felt really emotive and shared that with us, actually, I think it kind of felt like a green light to just go out into the world for sure.
I do want to shift a little bit because I wanted to talk about what role does food play in the story, and did you want certain dishes to be incorporated into the film?
I love that you asked that question. I remember one of our execs being like, "There's too much food. There's too much food." And I answered this question similarly to the way I answered the question about shooting on film. Is that like I'm so familiar with Italian cuisine. What is it that you guys have? The melted cheese on
Oh, poutine. Poutine.
poutine. I'm familiar with poutine. I'm familiar with hamburgers in the States. I'm familiar with with wine in France, and for me, for so many reasons, I'm like, we need to be proud of our cuisine. We need to show it. We need to show it in the context. I think it does multiple things in the film. It also creates bridges, because I think in Brazil they have acarajé, and acarajé is from Acara because it was a food Yoruba people used to make. So like Brazilians saw that and immediately see so much of themselves. And I think food is an identifier. It's a calling card. It's an ability for people to see your culture and understand it, and it's a communicator. It's a shorthand for what your culture is. And I think in addition, specifically in the restaurant, the booker scene that you're probably laboring of, we show the food. A lot of the themes of the film is decay. Like I said, one side of it is the fruit. You turn it around and it's
And
decaying.
it's rot, yeah.
It's rotting. So I think in that scene, we also wanted to lean into that. Is like how food is so plentiful at the beginning, then afterwards it's like all the flies and all the insects preying on the aftermath of the food, and how those dogs in the periphery are like chewing on the bone, and we're foreshadowing Fola having that conversation afterwards. But I think food, it has, and ice cream and all that stuff. I think, and the whale being chopped up as food as well. I think so much of it has so much to play, because I think what we do as humans, we end up consuming ideas and consuming ourselves, and not remembering to replenish the land and quench our appetite and understand values about how we consume as well. So yeah, I think a lot of that was very intentional.
Akinola, this has been a wonderful conversation, and I thank you so much for your time, but also for such a beautiful movie that allows you to feel how you want to and experience it the way that anyone should be able to. And it's such a beautiful film. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric, man. Wonderful interview. I really appreciate you.